All right. Well, hi, everybody. Hi, everybody. I'm Leslie. I'm the director for grad community and program development here at CU Boulder. And today we're going to chat a little bit about imposter syndrome. If anyone's willing to turn their camera on, that would be wonderful, just because it is hard to sort of do my best to present to a thank you. Hello. Hi, Amanda. Oh, awesome. You guys are super sweet. Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, so we'll run through this presentation and then I'd like to make sure that we have enough time for questions. So a couple things. One is I'll try and keep it pretty informal. Feel free to throw your hand up, throw something out in the chat, interrupt, whatever you need to do. If, I say something and you need some clarification. Other than that, we'll just go ahead and get started. I'm going to share my screen with you guys. So today we're here to talk about imposter syndrome. Funny thing, this is actually one of our more popular offerings that we have not only for grad students, but also faculty and staff alike. So clearly it's a pretty prevalent problem. I guess I'd like to sort of get out of the way one thing though. I think that there's a lot of narrative out there around overcoming imposter syndrome. And like there's some kind of place where you're supposed to get to where it doesn't happen anymore. And my approach and how I want to talk about this today is more along the lines of we're all going to have some kind of imposter syndrome at some point around something in our life if we have any sense of self-awareness at all. And so just want to put that out there and normalize that piece. So I guess I'm supposed to be the expert. That's why we're here. I do know a lot about imposter syndrome. It's interesting. Today we'll be talking a little bit about some of the symptoms. So if you're not sure if it's imposter syndrome, we'll talk about how we know whether or not it is. The risks around developing imposter syndrome. There are definitely demographics that are more prone to imposter syndrome than others. And I bet that our audience will tell us what those are today. Letting go of this idea of overcoming, like I said, we're going to move through imposter syndrome. We're going to accept that there's going to be flex around imposter syndrome. And we'll learn how to manage it. Like that part, I can definitely help with. So the management of imposter syndrome, we will definitely be able to get to that point. The other thing that I want to mention today is that we need to sort of normalize imposter syndrome in academia. And honestly, the word sort of was like the wrong word for me to use. We need to normalize imposter syndrome in academia. And so whether you are a mentor, an advisor, a staff member, a professor, an administrator, we don't always want to talk about imposter syndrome in academia because we think it means something about us. But what that does is it actually just gives imposter syndrome more power. And what it also does is like, it will limit people's ability to do amazing research and take risks and all those things. So we need to be talking about imposter syndrome. I tell my students all the time when I have it. I even have like flashes of it sometimes when I'm talking about something that I know I'm an expert in. And that's normal. I mean, some of that is just us having some kind of a nervous reaction to being on the spot and presenting our work, which is a highly vulnerable activity. So if you're an academic and you are publishing and you are presenting, if you're putting yourself out there are risks associated with that. And so having that feeling of imposter syndrome generally stems from the vulnerability when it comes to like, I don't want to say criticism, but critique of the work. So then, of course, we're going to know better and do better. We need to be out there talking about our own imposter syndrome. We need to be able to give students examples, give our colleagues examples, and be able to, not have a lot of shame around it, because I think that's a real problem. So this is sort of how we know whether or not, whether or not some of the language that you're using around imposter syndrome means that you might actually have it. So the first thing is luck. Oh, I just got lucky. And this is kind of one of my favorite ones. No, you did not just get lucky. Not unless you were the most lucky person ever. You wouldn't have gotten through all the things that you've gotten through and been sitting here today if it was solely luck. Timing. Oh, the timing was just right. It was good timing. That's how we got here. Difficulty. I actually, um, I went out and had two big margaritas the day before I decided to apply to a PhD program. I was 23 years old, and the research, I'm being honest, did not matter to me. What mattered to me the most is that someone was going to call me doctor, because what I wanted at 23 is I wanted to respect myself more. So I figured if I went and I did something hard, it would mean something. But the truth is that when I got the PhD at the end of it and they said, congratulations, doctor, my first thought was, well, it couldn't have been that hard, if I had done it. And so we have this idea around difficulty that, well, if, it clearly can't be that hard because I was, able to manage to do this thing. Doubt disguised as humility. So that's one of these, like when we teach courses on imposter syndrome, there's this, oh, this old thing concept. So think about, maybe if you have a PhD and you have like a framed, if you have a framed degree in your office and someone comments on it, or, if you have an award up in your office, if you have medals, whatever the case might be, you immediately sort of diminish it. You're like, oh yeah, that was no big deal. Sounds like humility, but really what that is at its core is self-doubt. And then there are these internal and external factors that go along with imposter syndrome that we can't really ignore. If you grew up in a household where perfectionism was expected, that's an external factor. And you constantly trying to reach for those, reach for like the accolade, reach for the attaboy, wanting it to be good enough. Chances are it might never have been. And slowly but surely, as your performance increases, expectations increase too. Or they just stop really acknowledging the certain level of performance. So that's an external factor. I grew up in a house that was definitely like that. My parents very much cared about appearances. That was what mattered most. And so for me to be accomplished, for me to do anything, they just wanted to be able to say we had done a thing and be proud of us. And so that is an external factor that will set you up for imposter syndrome. Now, the internal self-doubt is some of what we've talked about already, like, oh, I just got lucky, or, oh, the timing was okay, or, maybe it's really not that hard. Those internal pieces. Now, obviously some of the external factors are going to change how we react internally, but we'll chat a little bit about that further on in the presentation. So this is sort of my personal history of imposter syndrome. This is making sure that you trust me in the words that are coming out of my mouth, which they say is, critical for imposter syndrome. I just remember feeling like everyone else seemed so comfortable. Like in class, when they would put their hands up or talking to each other. And granted, I was young when I entered my program, I was 23, but I definitely didn't feel that confidence. Where it actually started to change was endurance running for me. And that's the first time I ever did something that I legitimately felt was very difficult and did it successfully. But starting my first ultra and looking around at everyone, everybody looked ready and nobody looked nervous. And it was 50 miles and that seemed like a long time to me. But yeah, the confidence of other people definitely made me doubt myself at the starting line. The other piece is like, I kept waiting for like this next level of like, now I've achieved the thing. So I don't know about you guys, but I'm going to guess, my educated guess is about half, maybe more of this audience will be able to relate to this. Every single time that I met some type of, or completed some type of milestone, and this is especially true for people in academia, we don't do a good job of celebrating because it's always on to the next and on to the next and on to the next, right? So I graduated in 2007. They say, congratulations, doctor. I say, okay, well, clearly it couldn't have been that hard. I go and I get a tenure track job. What's next? Go get tenure. What's next? Associate, right? So it's like, there's never a lot of time, I feel like, to celebrate some of those milestones. And so I thought when I got tenure, I'd feel it. I thought, publishing a certain number of articles, I'd feel it, but I just never, ever did in that way. Then of course it couldn't have been that hard. Funny thing on that though, one area where it really helped me was I had my baby. I had my first son in 2006, right the day after I defended my proposal. And everyone said, "You are so screwed, you will never finish." But my mantra was, if Britney Spears can raise babies, I can definitely do this and get a PhD. Like, it made me feel confident that there was hope. One of the things that I think is very helpful and definitely helped me is looking for growth opportunities outside of academia. And for me, that was, endurance sports. And while I have struggled to get there with myself when it comes to like the academic portion and some of the intelligence, physically, I know I can do hard things, which actually helps me quite a bit professionally when I have to do hard things. And now when it comes up, I also know that it's going to go away. So for me, it will still show up, but I understand that it's temporary and I can work through it. There are things you can learn to talk to yourself about, things you can learn to say that help quite a bit. So here are just some symptoms as far as imposter syndrome is concerned. History of perfectionism, high expectations, both external and internal. And then there's this fun thing called precrastination and procrastination. We're all familiar with procrastination, I would say, correct? Yeah, all right. So we're familiar with procrastination, but precrastination is some next level business. So your precrastination, which is very, very common among high performers with imposter syndrome, is that they are very busy doing everything but whatever actually has to be done. So from an academic perspective, if you want to think about it like, maybe you have an article you need to write or finish, wrap up edits on, and you have time set aside during the day to do this thing. A lot of people procrastinate when it comes to writing. And some of the negative self-talk around there is really interesting to me, because what I'll hear from my students and what I hear from faculty is like, oh, I don't know, I just had a lazy day, or I've just been like, I don't know, I just haven't been in the mood, or I'm just not quite there yet. But there are a million different reasons, that they attribute this procrastination to. But in reality, we're procrastinating for a reason. We're procrastinating because whatever it is that we're doing is uncomfortable for us. And writing generally is very uncomfortable for most people. And that is something we can train our way out of, but that's repetition. That's you showing up and doing some kind of writing, even if it's garbage, every single day. So that helps with the procrastination piece. Procrastination, exposure therapy. That's how we get through procrastination. Constantly doing something, even if the bar is very, very, very low. So with a lot of my students, what I have them do around writing, because that tends to be where we see, peak imposter syndrome and procrastination, is just start writing something every single day. It doesn't matter if it's one sentence, doesn't matter if it's two, maybe you have a great day and it's an hour, but the action of just you opening up your computer and sitting down to write, that's the hard part. And that's why people procrastinate, because we're holding ourselves to such high standards that we don't want to just have a barf draft. We don't want to just like spew some stuff out. We want it to be right and we want it to be good and we want it to be perfect because, oh my God, judgment. But the truth is that one, no one needs to see your barf draft. Two, you can't fix anything when it's all up here. And so it all just turns around and you feel more and more and more insecure. The other thing, especially that we see in academia is this idea around like, oh, it's just me, and then people isolate. And isolation can come from a number of different, it has a number of different causes, but COVID, for example, the last couple of years, when we look at the mass exodus from academia, well, maybe I should make you aware that that happened. We lost a lot of professors during COVID. We also lost a fair number of graduate students during COVID. And the reason that we saw this was because people were so disconnected and living in their own little bubble that there was no way for them to actually measure where they were with their peers. Nothing realistic at all, nothing tangible. They had no connection. So those growth opportunities that would normally be there to help prevent imposter syndrome did not exist. And those are the things that we need to be creative and brilliant and to come up with new research and to feel inspired and motivated. And isolation will suck all of that out and will greatly increase imposter syndrome because now you have no sense of self at all. when you're just working alone. And unfortunately, a lot of what we do in academia is fairly isolating. And then of course, there's this idea of like, if I just do more and more, and if I work harder and harder, but if you're finding that when you're doing that, everything just starts to mean less and less, and the quality of the work is lower and lower, then we need to start taking a look at like what the root cause is behind some of this. So the other thing here, you can read for yourselves. I don't need to read for you, but if you identify with any minority population, chances are imposter syndrome is going to be more likely for you. And we can talk a little bit about that too, but one of the really interesting things that that came up, I don't know, it was around retention recently. So I was reading an article, it was in the Chronicle, around retention recently, and specifically like women in engineering and women in STEM fields, and how difficult it was not to just retain the women, but to retain anyone who identified as a minority at all. And it came back to just this lack of feeling like there is collaboration, feeling that that their work was valued. And so all of these things can really contribute to imposter syndrome. Some of the real issues that happen in academia, in my opinion, are you are constantly having to prove your worth. So the thing that I said about like, I reach one milestone, then the next, then the next, then the next, you're never really done. I don't know what I thought tenure was going to be like, but once I got tenure, eyes on the prize, it was the next thing, and then it's the next thing, and it's the next thing. You have to, you have to apply for your promotions, and I think you should have to, but the point is like, you never really truly arrive. And I think there's this expectation in academia that we will feel like at some point we've arrived. And that exists at different levels for all kinds of different people. Some of the competition for tenure, and this isn't true in every scenario, but in some departments, if you know that they're only going to give tenure to 2 professors and they've hired 4, clearly there's quite a bit of competition and stress and risk associated with that. Another main issue in academia that we see around imposter syndrome is there is a lack of management. And by that, I mean, a lot of times when a new professor comes in, you are thrown into a classroom, at least part-time, and most likely you don't have any professional teaching experience. Your PhD might not be in curriculum, and yet now you're in front of this classroom. And we don't do a great job of setting people up for success on that front. There's a lot of freedom in academia. And when I say lack of management, one of the biggest instances where we see a dramatic increase in imposter syndrome is when a student stops coursework. As soon as you set them free and they're the ones setting deadlines, they're the ones working on the milestones, as soon as there's no hard oversight, and as soon as they're left to their own devices, that's usually when we start to see a lot of self-doubt. And that's not just among students. I just gave one of these talks to new faculty. Most of them definitely felt that way. That it's like, well, now what? How do I manage my time? How do I make sure I'm getting things done? How do I even know if it's good? How do I make sure that I'm, that when I ask for feedback, it's at the right time? All that good stuff. Flexible milestones, we just talked about. So if I'm the one saying that I want to have something published by, the end of next month, if that deadline comes and goes, nobody really knows, right? But I know. And what happens when that occurs, and this is very common among faculty, you start to really lose trust in yourself. Like, you don't trust yourself to set deadlines then. It's hard for you to set and meet goals because there's a history of failure, especially because most people need some form of external accountability in order to do things well. Vulnerability in research, I chatted with you guys about just a second ago. With a lot of the procrastination, especially, people will do everything but what's important. And by that, I mean, okay, this is an honest example because I'm really bad at giving fake ones. So this morning, I should definitely have been doing an hour of grading. And instead, what I did is I made all the food in the house. I cooked a bunch of stuff and I felt very productive. And I can look over there at the stack of all the stuff that I'm putting in the freezer. But the reality is I didn't really do the important thing, right? And now I'm an hour behind. Isolation. When we're alone, obviously we're disconnected. We don't have people to talk to. We can't normalize our feelings of imposter syndrome. In academia, there's the publish or perish. We all know it. We've heard it a million times. There's very little acknowledgement of achievements. I don't know if this is true for everyone in here, but like when I got tenure, I got, the little note in the note came, I got my tenure portfolio back and it's like, congratulations. Okay, cool. I got tenure. And maybe they mention it in a faculty meeting, like, good job, but that's it. Then you move on. Everyone's moving on. And in academia, it's like the shark. It has to keep swimming or it dies. The other thing too is at a certain level, when you have your degree, some kind of performance is just expected. And I have students, and I can't say this for sure for many faculty because I've only talked to a few, but I have students that are admitted into programs where their specialty, like their background, may not be what that program has going on exactly. So like computer science and engineering, for example. And yet when those students come in and they're in these classes with people who do know a lot of, maybe a lot more than they do, their understanding is that they just have to meet this new standard and there's not a lot of support behind that. And we're not good at talking about all the things that we don't know and don't understand. We internalize it, and that's when imposter syndrome really starts to flourish. I see something pop up in the chat. Yeah. Thanks, Thomas. True, accurate. It's like, you passed, and now let's talk. Sorry, I was just looking at the chat there. So imposter syndrome also, from a diversity and inclusion perspective, is a real problem. Imposter syndrome is not just like how we feel on our own in our homes when we're doubting ourselves. It's a problem institutionally. So it's very, very, very broad. And we don't talk about it, once again, because it's vulnerable. We don't want to have a bunch of people who are supposed to be the very best in their field saying, I doubt myself. Like, there's judgment associated with that. I mentioned to you guys the high dropout rates in STEM fields, especially among women and minorities, which can make it very, very challenging to actually recruit the kind of people that we are looking for when we say we want to have a diverse and inclusive environment at CU. We could say that, right? So it's hard to get people to apply and to get people to stay when the support systems are not there. And then this is the part we're responsible for. There's a lot of like career sabotage because we downplay things. And I've already mentioned this to you, so I won't go through it all in detail again. But we are very we dismiss our achievements, many of us with imposter syndrome, because we just don't trust it enough. And it almost feels like if we accept it, it can be taken away. Like it's like, oh, this feels good, and then someone can come and take it away. So there's a lot of fear associated with that. So the managing versus overcoming, there are a bunch of different things that we can do on this front. So like I said at the beginning, if you have any sense of self-awareness at all, you are going to have some feeling of imposter syndrome around some activity or behavior at some point. You just will. That's normal, having doubt. You're not going to be perfectly confident 100% of the time. And so the first thing to do when you start to have those feelings of imposter syndrome is to acknowledge, okay, so like number one, this is universal. If I'm getting ready to go give a talk and I'm at WAGS and there are a couple hundred people there, of course I have a moment before I get on stage where I'm like, oh my God, there's probably someone in that audience that knows more than me and I'm going to make a complete fool out of myself. I'm sure we've all thought this many, many, many times. But the truth is that what's really accurate is that every single person in that audience has experienced imposter syndrome around something at some point. And so usually when I am giving a very big talk, I'll address that just at the beginning. And you would be surprised how the tone in the room changes because someone's actually willing to acknowledge like, hey, yeah, this is a problem. When you're talking about your achievements, some things to look out for are the, well, yes, but. Right? So one example around the yes, but is that I finished my PhD in right under 3 years, which is fast. But I had a baby and I was broke. So there was a lot of incentive for me to finish. But my dissertation was on how pornography affects the formation of the female self-ideal. And my committee was 100% white, 100% older white men, minus there was one woman on my committee who was in her mid-40s. And so when I finished and they said, congratulations, doctor, this is all great. Anyone that said anything to me about it, I was like, yes, but my topic, I think I just picked like the right thing at the right time. There wasn't a bunch of research out there on it. Probably there were members of my committee who were not going to be comfortable asking me all the questions they wanted to ask, but I immediately minimized it, right? The yes, but here's some things to take into consideration. One of the other things that we can do when we're trying to manage imposter syndrome is to be really intentional about the feedback we're asking for when we do ask people to look at our work. Now, this is not only a behavior that you need to practice when you're submitting work, but also something that you should work on when you're receiving work, asking for clarity around feedback. And by that, I mean, if I just want to see if something floats, like if I just want to see how you feel about this idea, I need to be clear that that's what I'm looking for. I had a student who was in her last year, her PhD, and she turned in part of a chapter to her advisor to look over as they had discussed, but there was really no context. And he didn't respond to her, but he did schedule a meeting with her, which she went in, he didn't like respond over email and have edits. She went into this meeting and he basically told her like, good luck to you because this is trash. And what she was looking for was just like, can this idea become not a writing thing, not a line by line, but she wasn't clear. That happened. And she also, already had some pretty wicked imposter syndrome. And it probably lengthened her stay at CU for at least a semester because it took her so long to recover from that, since she did already have that doubt. Practicing the sandwich technique, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. If you have students or colleagues, anyone who's asking you for feedback, we always want to be able to start with something positive, then something constructive, and then end with something that we really liked, right? That's the way we want to provide feedback. And I feel like sometimes in academia, it's I had to walk 3 miles uphill in the snow to and from school thing. That if things were hard for you, they should then be hard for the student, all that. We're really bad at remembering things accurately. That's a whole other talk we could give on neuroscience, but you can't trust your impression of really what you went through historically. And so to have it be a not supportive environment, or to have, cracking a whip all the time because you felt like that's what happened to you, that doesn't actually encourage any growth or development, creativity, brilliance, anything from any of your students. So we got to stop that. And the same is true when we think about ourselves and we talk to ourselves, when we're asking for certain kinds of feedback, personally, like on our own work, being clear around, hey, I'm a little nervous showing this at this point. This is kind of what I'm looking for. How do you feel about this idea? But clarity around what you're looking for lessens the chance that you're just going to get hit by a Mack truck. The barf draft is my best recommendation for imposter syndrome around writing. But here's the problem. If you have imposter syndrome and you're a perfectionist, what you're trying to do when you write is think about the right way to say something in your head. You're like, what sounds perfect? And you will be writing and you'll delete and you'll write and you're deleting. You're trying to massage it the whole entire time because you want the quality to be really high, right? Well, that prevents you from doing anything. So let it go. I work with my students on the barf draft, which is whatever's going on in here, we put out on the paper, even if it's not fully formed. And so I'll have articles that are, well thought out in one part, and then there are just a bunch of X's and blanks to fill in at some later date. I keep writing. And I know you all have taken standardized tests, And I'm sure you remember when they would talk to you about how to take a standardized test, they say, if you don't know the answer, skip it, keep going, right? Don't just stop there. The same thing is true for writing. It doesn't have to be perfect. It can be a bullet. It just needs to be out on the page. And with that, you really start to see progress and I think gain quite a bit of confidence. We've talked about pre and procrastination. Procrastination is you being busy and productive to protect yourself and your vulnerability because you don't want to do what's actually important. Procrastination, which is just generally putting a thing off, there's a reason behind it. It most of the time is vulnerability and risk. Whatever the activity is bringing something up that feels vulnerable and risky to you. Mentors that you trust. So not only should you be a really good mentor, but you should find really good mentors and understand that mentors outside of academia are actually very, very, very important as you learn to work through imposter syndrome. Within, this whole ivory tower piece, obviously there should be someone that you talk to, but the perspective from inside is not necessarily the most helpful all the time. And neither is the culture. And so looking for mentors outside to be able to validate some of the work, talk to you about what you're doing can be really beneficial. Okay, resiliency and imposter syndrome. So most of the stuff that I teach at CU is around resiliency, building resiliency. What's your bounce factor? How quickly can you get up when you get knocked down? And when you have imposter syndrome, sometimes it can feel very, very crippling and it hurts this, it hurts the development of resiliency. But here's some things you can say to yourself. So number one, normalize self-doubt. Of course, I wonder if I can do this because, I don't know, maybe I haven't done it before, or maybe this is a new environment where I'm going to perform. And of course I'm nervous. And of course I have feelings about it. And sometimes even if it's just the same thing over and over and over again, if you're nervous about public speaking, if it's difficult to get up in front of audiences, you are in good company. You're in good company. It's normal. Number two is you probably are not going to go out there and win an Oscar for your acting chops when it comes to fooling every single person around you who has hired you or trusted you or brought you on. You're not that good at fooling people. You might think that you are in the wicked imposter syndrome peaks, but you are not. Like I mentioned, finding mentors outside of academia is key. I found that to be incredibly helpful for me. Understanding that every single time that something doesn't get published or you do get some kind of critical feedback or a talk doesn't go well, instead of internalizing it, saying, okay, so this is direction. Why didn't this go well? What didn't work? And think of it as an opportunity instead of a judgment on your worth, whatever field you're in. Because there can't be success unless you fail repeatedly over and over and over again. Not meaningful success, not long-term, because in order to have that, you have to keep trying. And nobody is going to succeed 100% of the time. So every time there's a hiccup, instead of feeling like, oh my God, why am I so dumb? Why can't I do the thing? Think of it as an opportunity to one, build resilience, and two, improve the growth mindset experience, which is basically you just telling yourself, okay, interesting that this happened. Why did it happen? What can I do about it? The 1, 2, 3, go. Sometimes, like I was saying, the idea of the hard thing for many academics, which is writing, isn't the actual sitting down and the writing of itself. It's the opening of the computer to sit down and do the writing. It's the idea before the writing that you're going to do the writing. That's the hard part. Feeling like this thing is just lurking over you, right? So it's like, I know I should be doing this. I know I should be doing this. Okay, in 30 minutes, I'll start writing. In 20 minutes, then I'll really start. I'm going to edit this first, but after lunch, I'm going to write. I'm going to take a nap now because I'm tired and I won't be able to write well if I'm tired. And next thing you know, you're going to bed at night and no writing has happened. So the 1, 2, 3, go has been very effective for me. And it's mainly just I give myself to the count of 3. Like if I have another laptop right here, I'm like 1, 2, 3, open it. Just open it. Be done. That's the hard part, is the opening and the getting ready. The other thing with 1, 2, 3, go, especially if it's around writing or any academic performance, is never, ever, ever end a research session or a writing session without leaving a note to yourself about where you were and what you were thinking at that time. That will cut down the time that you have to spend getting back into things like you wouldn't believe. So that really does help with that 1, 2, 3, because the more that we practice opening the computer, writing 2 sentences, or even a bunch of X's, or saying, hey, I had this thought today that could potentially be used for this, but it might be trash, I don't know, and then closing it down. The 1, 2, 3, go is you accepting the thing's going to happen and doing it anyway. I'm doing hard things outside of academia, I mentioned. Find other ways to build self-worth. Make sure that you're celebrating milestones. If I could redo the last, sometimes I'm like, I'm still young, and I'm like, no, maybe not. If I started teaching in 2007, so if I could go back in time and maybe celebrate things, celebrate accomplishments a little bit differently, I absolutely 100% would, because they are worth celebrating. You did a thing and you should acknowledge that. And yeah, having things to look forward to really help with imposter syndrome too, because if you're planning some kind of a celebration, if you're planning something nice, you know, chances are other people will be involved, and you won't just be alone with whatever the accomplishment was and second guessing its value because you're just in your own head all the time. Practice over and over and over again. Whatever the thing is that you're feeling imposter syndrome around, stop thinking about it. Well, it's easier said than done. Attempt to not think about it with a bunch of judgment, but think about it as practice. When I first started endurance running, and I looked at especially the men that were in our fields, it was scary for me, and every run felt stressful because I was very performance focused. But when I started really logging miles, every single run just became practice. I'm just showing up and let's see what I've got today. I know I'm good for the time. Let's see what happens. And curiosity. So it's all practice and all curiosity. I'm not worried about output every day. I'm not worried about intensity every day. This is not just true for athletics. This is true in our work too. But if we show up routinely, we have the discipline and we do the time, it will all come out in the wash. So going into things, thinking of them as practice. I even think of my days that way now, which is I wake up and I'm like, well, we're gonna see how today goes. Every day I'm just practicing to be better and better, and I'm trying to learn more and more. And the last piece here with imposter syndrome is reflection. So when I tell you guys, you know, that failure is going to lead to success, you know, that you're going to have failure over and over again to get to the point where you're successful, we have to reframe the way that we respond to challenges and failures. And today, of course, like our audience is mainly academic, so I'll focus on academia. But when I tell my students to reflect, and I'm teaching faculty to reflect, it's actually sitting down and writing something, which could potentially be your writing activity for that day if you needed it to be, just while you're getting in the practice. But the reflection is, what happened? Number one is what happened. So like, let's say I give up to give a talk and I just fall flat on my face. The audience and I are not connecting. This is pretty much my nightmare, by the way. And it's just one giant dumpster fire. If I say that's what happened, my next question to myself is, how do I feel about it? Holy smokes, if that did happen, I would feel such a level of like embarrassment and shame and fear, because this thing that I'm supposed to be really good at, I fell on my face in front of a bunch of people. But I'm not always great at identifying feelings. And so what can be really helpful for those of us who are struggling with imposter syndrome is downloading a feelings wheel. If you just Google it and find it, stick it on your laptop. And every time that you just feel uncomfortable or unsure, don't accept that as the answer. Really dig in and see how you are truly, truly feeling. At the end of the day, where I usually end up is I feel inadequate, and that's what's triggering imposter syndrome. But for years, I just knew I felt bad. I couldn't figure out what the actual word was. So if we say, what happened in the reflection? How do I feel about it? The next step is, why did this happen? So if I fall on my face, is it because I wasn't prepared? Did I not sleep well the night before? Did I eat too much sugar beforehand or drink too much coffee? Was, the room set up in a way that made me feel uncomfortable? Did I have a technology issue at the beginning? There are all these things that we can start to collect as data points. What is going to trigger these feelings? So that's how, when I get to like the, what happened? How do I feel? Why did it happen? And then the final step is, what am I going to do about it? And this is where I want to point back to practice. Every day, living with imposter syndrome is just you showing up routinely for yourself and trying again. Do the reflection, accept it as practice, try to have a lot of curiosity around those feelings that you're holding and less judgment. And I'm not saying this from a place where I've mastered imposter syndrome. I do not feel that way. I still feel that way most of the time. But now I understand that even though I'll get a flash of it, it will go away. And I do know I'm accomplished in my field. And these are things that, you'll have to remind yourself of routinely. So with the role of reflection, you can't change what you don't know. So I have a lot of students or faculty that are like, oh, but I already have a planner, or I already use Outlook. And I'm like, well, that's different than you writing a reflection. And I don't mean sitting down and writing War and Peace. This thing should maybe be a paragraph and a half, but you do it daily, because you can't change and you can't improve the things that you don't know. There are certain things that trigger imposter syndrome for me. And I've noticed it after years and years and years of collecting data. Number one is if it's a brand new audience that I don't know. Like walking into this today, and who knows if I'm doing a good job, but coming into this today, I'm like, I feel good. I've given this talk before. These are kind of my people. I understand where most everyone's coming from. But the first time I started doing some of this stuff corporately, because the audience was so different, my imposter syndrome felt quite a bit more significant to me, because I just wasn't sure. So that's something I've noticed over the years, is if there's a change in audience, it's worth it to me to spend some time really processing that, so that I don't go in there and feel uncomfortable. The growth mindset is every single setback that we have, what can we learn from it? Instead of internalizing it and taking everything very, very personally, which once again, I do all the time. But instead of, staying in that space, even if that's where you are, asking yourself, okay, so what can I do? And having whatever it is in your reflection, at the end, what can I do about it? That's action. And action is control. And control really helps with imposter syndrome. You can do things. Data collection I mentioned. Learned optimism is looking around and thinking to ourselves, which, man, I wish I had done this years ago. There was a point in time where all you ever wanted was to be sitting where you are right now. You just wanted the opportunity to be here. That's what you wanted. And now that you have it, it's like, well, you just accept it and move on. But learned optimism is being able to look at your day, no matter how stressful, no matter how shaky we feel about our performance, no matter how, I don't know, no matter how much judgment we feel. At the end of the day, you're sitting somewhere where you really, really, really once just wanted to be. And to have some appreciation and gratitude for that, which does help build up resiliency, helps with imposter syndrome. Building trust in yourself. When I talk to you guys about the 1, 2, 3, open up the computer, I promise you that if you started doing little things like that for yourself every day, your imposter syndrome would significantly diminish. Because what you would be doing is building quite a bit of trust in your ability to do hard things, even if the hard thing is opening up your computer and looking at something you've been avoiding. Like, let's say you get feedback, right? You're avoiding. 1, 2, 3, open it, look at it. I promise you, if you can show up for yourself like that and be mindful of those opportunities when you're reflecting, it will make a big difference. Imposter syndrome oftentimes is linked to you not trusting yourself enough. You don't trust yourself enough and your abilities enough. But trust is something we can build. And even though we can't wave a magic wand and make imposter syndrome just go away, what we can do is develop better skills so we know how to move through it with a little bit more grace. Control the controllables. And this is, if I had you all as my students all the time, I focus a lot on automation and habits and, this growth mindset piece, resiliency. But think about all the things that you can control. Think about your environment. Think about creating environments where you can be more successful. And then do those things. Show up for yourself because you're worth the investment. The facts, feelings, what and why is what I described to you earlier. That's the reflection portion. I think that everyone should do it every day. And as far as action for today is concerned, is I'd love for everyone to go get a notebook and just start today. You know, like this is their reflection. What happened today? How do I feel? You know, why did it happen? And what can I do about it? All right. Whew. Okay, we're almost there. Build trust in yourself through small actions. If you say you're going to do something, get up and go do it. I don't care if it's empty the dishwasher. I don't care if it's like read that stupid email and respond. If it goes through your mind, get up, go do the thing. That's how you build trust in yourself. Also, frequency is mastery. So if you're uncomfortable about something, you don't know if you're a good writer, you don't know if you're a good researcher. I didn't know if I'd be a good runner. I didn't know this or mother, whatever. Well, with motherhood, unfortunately, there's practice every day. Like I couldn't avoid that one. But that's what you want. You want exposure. So exposure therapy will help you. Any area where you're feeling imposter syndrome, think frequency. How often can I expose myself to this discomfort? And just sit there for a minute and then be done. Connect with other people. You're not alone in feeling this way. I promise you, a lot of people do feel this way. Otherwise, we wouldn't have 22 people in this room. Don't try to compare yourself to anyone else because you don't know what their starting point is. And this is what I said to my students who are, you know, who were admitted into programs where their specialty, their background specialty wasn't necessarily what their, you know, work was going to be in. Well, you can't compare yourself then to your neighbor who's been doing this for 8 years. It's pointless. And so comparison will hinder your performance. People think like, oh, if I beat myself up, if I compare myself to this person, you know, maybe it'll drive me to do better. It won't. Negative self-talk never has helped anyone. You survived every hard thing you've done. So when you doubt yourself, remember that every talk you've given, everything, you know, you've published, all the things that you've done that have been successful have led you to this point. So you clearly haven't quit yet. We're still here. Thinking about purpose with imposter syndrome is also important. So like, why am I doing what I'm doing? And when I was 23, I wanted someone to call me doctor. At this point, at 44, what I want to do is just make a positive difference. I don't even care how that happens, but if I can just improve something and leave it better than when I found it, that to me is purpose. And the next piece is everything that we've talked about today. If any of it, you know, if you connected with any of it, you know, please make sure that if you have advisees or staff or colleagues that you can share some of this stuff with, help normalize some of those struggles so that they also feel like, you know, they're going to be okay too. Holy smokes. Okay, that was so much talking. I'm going to stop. I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to take some questions, but I'm also going to grab my bubble water off the counter, but I can hear you all. Okay. All right. Oh, finding mentors. Yes. So it depends on the kind of mentor that you're looking for, obviously. I encourage most of my grad students to look, you know, inside and outside of academia. Also understand that different mentors are going to have different roles. And so, you know, one of the things, Peter, that's most important is figuring out what you want mentorship for. Is it something like, you know, if I feel like some other mom is crushing it, maybe I need some parental mentorship. If when I look at career building, I see people taking risks, doing the kind of work I want to do, I would definitely approach that person and say, hey, I really admire X, Y, and Z. You know, would you mind if I stayed in touch or if I picked your brain? Anything like that. And you'll find that most of the time people will say, you know, people will say yes. And so figure out what areas of your life you want mentors in, and then think about who you respect in that realm, and then reach out and connect. Frame and counter procrastination. So procrastination is just awareness. And I think reflection is how we get there most of the time. And what I mean by that is I know what it feels like when I have a productive day, but I also know the difference between me having a productive day and me actually doing everything that I said I was going to do. Right? So procrastination is busy for busy's sake. And that's usually because you're avoiding something. So what are you actually avoiding? So one of the things that I tend to avoid is having any phone, like I don't want to ever make phone calls around prescriptions. I don't want to schedule appointments. I don't like making phone calls to human beings at all. And so I put stuff off until I'm desperate and I'm out of medication or something like that. But I push it off, but like, what's the point? And I'll do everything else but the thing. And part of it is just sitting down with myself and being realistic and thinking, okay, so if I'm procrastinating and I'm pushing this thing off, who do I expect to show up and do it for me? Will someone be able to show up and do this? I tried sending my 16-year-old son. Turns out they can't really pick up drugs for you. So no, at the end of the day, it's gonna be me, right? It has to be me. So why am I putting it off? And so reframing the procrastination is a big part of it. And once I've gotten to that point where I'm finally feeling like, okay, I understand, it's got to be me. I'll sit for a minute, I'll accept the thing, and then 1, 2, 3, go do it. But yeah, the procrastination is crazy hard to overcome because in the moment, it actually feels really good. It feels like you're doing so many things. Your bathroom is sparkling, but who knows if you'll get tenure, you know, like it's like, you know, everything except the thing is done. Let's see. Oh, great. Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing that, Noah. Did that help explain the pre and procrastination? It's figuring out why you're doing it and what you're putting off, and then why you're putting it off. I don't like to do anything medical because I was very, very, very sick in 2015. And I had, you know, the prognosis was poor. It was 50-50. So anytime I walk into a doctor's office, have to schedule an appointment, have to pick up medication, like I know why I don't want to do it. But that doesn't mean that anyone else is going to show up and do it for me. Is procrastination a bad thing? Well, is it preventing you from doing the things that you actually need to do? If the answer is yes, then yes, it's bad. If the procrastination, if you can treat it like quarters in a day, which is, one of my students was recently talking to me about this. They're like, if I'm doing things throughout the day and then I screw one thing up, I just want to say, forget it and trash the rest of the day. So if you're procrastinating, think about your days in quarters. So like maybe I made all this food, but now I know as soon as I'm done with you guys, I'm going to go sit down and grade. Maybe I screwed up the first quarter and I didn't do the plan, but I have the next 3 quarters to make up for it. But procrastination is putting stuff off and being busy for busy's sake. So procrastination will let you have a clean house. It might let you have all the things, but it's not going to get you where you want to be. Does that answer that question? The pre and procrastination is kind of a weird one, I know. So let's think about that for a second. Yes, it helped. Okay, awesome. Now I know we only have 2 minutes left. So any other questions for me? Okay, do we feel like we have some action items? You didn't just show up and listen to me blah blah in your face for an hour. Get yourself a notebook, do the reflection. Yeah, Peter, that does help. I think the trust thing is a big part of the confidence part. We don't routinely show up for ourselves very well, but if you're tracking that and you're building trust over time, then that whole idea of like imposter syndrome and that fear that you can't does go away, because your imposter syndrome that you could potentially have in like academia or professionally, if you accomplish overcoming imposter syndrome in a different part of your life, that confidence does transfer over. So you start to believe in your abilities more. You're welcome, Kylie. All right. Whew. Okay. People are just saying thank you now. Any other questions that I can answer before I set y'all free? We're good? All right. Well, happy Thursday. Please don't hesitate to reach out with any questions you guys might have. I really appreciate you coming to the talk. Yeah, imposter syndrome is a fun one for me. All right. Have a nice day, everyone. Thank you.